When you first look at the Wikov 35 Kapka, there's a very specific reaction almost everyone has. You pause for a second, tilt your head slightly, and think, wait, this is from 1931? Seriously? Because it doesn't look like something from the early 1930s at all. It feels like someone secretly borrowed design ideas from the future, went back in time, and decided to build a car just to see how people would react. And honestly, that's not far from the truth. To really understand how unusual this car is, you have to picture what the automotive world looked like back then. In the early 1930s, most cars still followed a very traditional formula: tall bodies, flat panels, exposed wheels, and separate fenders that looked like they were attached as an afterthought. Aerodynamics wasn't just ignored, it was barely even considered. The idea that air resistance could significantly affect speed, efficiency, and comfort simply wasn't a priority. Cars were designed to move. How efficiently they moved through the air? That was someone else's problem. Probably the air's problem. But the engineers at Wikov clearly saw things differently. Instead of asking, how do we make this car look good, they asked a much more interesting question. What shape should a car have if we actually care about physics? And once you start thinking that way, you end up with something like the Kapka. The name itself gives everything away. Kapka means drop, and the entire car is designed around that idea. A water droplet is one of the most aerodynamically efficient shapes found in nature, and the engineers tried to replicate that as closely as possible. The front is smooth and rounded, allowing air to flow easily around it. The roofline gently curves toward the rear, and the tail narrows down in a clean, controlled way. There are no aggressive lines, no unnecessary decorations, no visual noise. Everything serves a purpose. Even the wheels, which on most cars of that era were fully exposed, are partially integrated into the body. That alone was a radical decision. At a time when other cars proudly displayed their mechanical parts, the Kapka was already trying to hide them for the sake of efficiency. It's almost like the car is quietly saying, I'm not here to impress you, but I probably will anyway. From certain angles, it looks elegant and futuristic. From others, it looks like a very aerodynamic teardrop that somehow learned how to drive. Either way, it's impossible to ignore. And unlike many unusual cars, this one wasn't just about looks. Underneath that smooth body, the Kapka was based on the Wikov 35 chassis and powered by a 1.7-liter inline four-cylinder engine with an overhead camshaft. That's about 105.9 cubic inches, producing roughly 35 horsepower at around 2,800 RPM. Now, 35 horsepower might not sound impressive today. In fact, some modern motorcycles would consider that a warm-up. But for its time, it was perfectly adequate. And more importantly, the Kapka didn't need more. Because of its aerodynamic efficiency, the car could reach a top speed of around 65 miles per hour, or approximately 105 kilometers per hour, and it could do so more smoothly and with less effort than many of its competitors. While other cars were essentially forcing their way through the air, the Kapka moved with it. It's like the difference between running through a crowd and walking through an empty street. Same goal, completely different experience. Power was delivered to the rear wheels through a 3-speed manual transmission. The overall layout was conventional, front engine, rear-wheel drive, which helped keep the car practical and reliable. The suspension system used solid axles and leaf springs, a standard setup for the time, known for durability. So while the outside looked like the future, the mechanical components were grounded in proven technology, and that balance was actually one of the car's strengths. Now, when it comes to turning and handling, you might expect something unusual. After all, this car doesn't exactly look conventional. But in reality, the steering system was straightforward. The front wheels were controlled through a traditional mechanical linkage, just like in other cars of that era. However, the real difference wasn't in how the car turned, it was in how it felt while doing it. Thanks to its streamlined shape, the Kapka experienced less aerodynamic drag and turbulence, especially at higher speeds. That meant better stability, less wind resistance, and a smoother driving experience overall. While other cars might start to feel unsettled as speed increased, the Kapka likely remained more composed. In simple terms, it didn't fight the road and it didn't fight the air either. The car had a wheelbase of about 110 inches and weighing around 2,600 pounds, which gave it a solid, balanced stance. It wasn't overly heavy, but it had enough mass to feel stable. Braking was handled by drum brakes on all four wheels, which was quite advanced for the early 1930s. So despite its unusual design, this wasn't just a concept or an experiment, it was a fully functional, road-going automobile that could keep up with real traffic. Now let's step inside, because the interior tells a completely different story. You might expect something futuristic, maybe even strange, considering the exterior design. But instead, the interior of the Kapka was surprisingly conventional. The seating position was upright, the cabin was relatively spacious, and the layout was simple and practical. There were no dramatic design experiments inside, just a clean, functional space designed for driving.
The dashboard featured basic instruments, easy to read and straightforward. A large steering wheel dominated the driver's area, and everything was arranged in a way that made sense. No confusion, no unnecessary complexity. But here's where things get interesting. Because of the car's aerodynamic shape, the interior environment was actually more refined than many of its competitors. Reduced wind resistance meant less noise, especially at higher speeds. The airflow around the car was smoother, which translated into a quieter and more comfortable ride. So while it didn't look futuristic inside, it felt more advanced in subtle ways. It's like wearing a simple outfit made from high-tech materials. It doesn't scream innovation, but you can definitely feel it. And then we arrive at the most surprising part of the story. Despite all this innovation, all this forward-thinking design, and all these clever engineering solutions, the Kapka was not a success. Only a small number of these cars were ever built, and none of the original examples are known to have survived to this day. Which is honestly a bit tragic, because this wasn't just a car, it was a glimpse into the future that arrived too early. But if you think about it, it's not that surprising. Imagine walking into a car dealership in 1931. On one side, you see a familiar, traditional car, something you understand, something that feels safe. On the other side, you see the Kapka, smooth, strange, futuristic, almost alien. Most people wouldn't even think twice. They'd go with what they know. And that's the thing about innovation. Being ahead of your time doesn't always mean success. Sometimes it just means being misunderstood.
There's also a certain irony in all of this. Just a few years later, aerodynamic design would start gaining attention. Streamlined cars would become more common, and manufacturers would begin to realize the importance of airflow, efficiency, and shape. The ideas behind the Kapka would eventually become mainstream. But in 1931, it was simply too early. Today, the Wikov 35 Kapka exists only in reconstructions and historical records, but every time you see it, it raises an interesting question. What if the world had been ready for it? Would automotive design have evolved faster? Would cars have become more efficient decades earlier? Or would it still have remained a fascinating, unusual experiment? We'll never know. But one thing is certain. The Kapka proves that even in the early days of the automotive industry, there were people thinking far beyond their time, people who weren't afraid to challenge conventions and rethink what a car could be. And sometimes those are the stories that matter the most, because the strangest cars are often the smartest ones, and the Wikov 35 Kapka is a perfect example of that. If you enjoy discovering rare, unusual, and ahead-of-their-time vehicles like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more incredible automotive stories ahead, and some of them are even more surprising than this one.